Okay, question number 2 from homework 21. Basically the same process. If you haven't watched the video for number 1 yet, go back and watch that if you're not sure about the process. This one seems a little trickier because we've got this 3/2 power here. But honestly, in the long run, if you know what the 3/2 power means, if you know what it means to raise something to the 3/2 power, you're going to be able to figure this out. So we will go through it, and when we get to the point where we need to worry about this, we'll worry about that. But right now, what we need to do is figure out what we want to rewrite this function as. I can't deal with this, but I do know how to integrate u to the 3/2, right? We know how to do a single variable to an exponent. We've raised it to a power. We know how to do that. So let's let that be how we set this up. So if I want to do u to the 3/2, well, then my u has to be this stuff in the parentheses here. So u equals x cubed plus 1. So I take the derivative of that with respect to x, and that's going to give me 3x squared. So du equals 3x squared dx. Okay? So let's check and see if that takes care of what's left in our function, because we already said this is our u to the 3/2. So du should equal x squared dx in a perfect world. Well, here we've got 3x squared dx, so we're not in a perfect world, but it's not a big deal. We have 3 times as much as we need here, so we need to divide our entire integral by 3. That's the same as multiplying it by 1/3. And again, if you don't want to think about that, just remember anything extra here goes into the bottom of the fraction. Anything extra here goes into the top of the fraction. And it helps too if you arrange your paper this way, because then this here will be towards the bottom and this here will be towards the top, and it's easy to see where those numbers go. So the reason that we do it is because I have 3x squared here, but I only actually need x squared, so I've got 3 times as much, so that means I have to divide the entire integral by 3. So now that we've got that, we need to set our bounds, and I guess I'm going to do it in 2 boxes this time. So my new upper bound and my new lower bound. And the way that we do that is look at what the bound is that they gave you. For this particular integral, they've given you 2 as your upper bound. And that's if everything's in terms of x. That meant plug in a 2 for every x. But we don't have x's. We need u's, so we're going to turn these into u bounds by taking the number they give us, so the 2 up here, and plugging it into the u that we found here. So our upper one is going to be 2 cubed plus 1, and that's 9. And our lower bound is going to be 0 cubed plus 1, and that is 1. Okay? So you have to plug in the bounds that they gave you into your u to figure out what your new bounds are, and I'll just go ahead and write those in there. So there they are, and now we just solve as usual. So that's 1/3 times the integral, oh, well, I don't need to rewrite that, I'm sorry. Scratch that. That's 1/3. Well, the integral of u to the 3/2 is u to the 5/2 over 5/2. And we're evaluating that from 1 to 9. And so we're just kind of multiplying that together. So that gives me 1/3 times 2/5. I'm bringing this 5/2 up out of the denominator, so I have to flip it. Times u to the 5/2, and that's from 1 to 9. So that gives me 2 over 15 times u to the 5/2 from 1 to 9. Again, I keep forgetting to draw these equal signs. All of this stuff is equal. Okay, and now I plug in. Before I plug in though, now we've got this 5/2, and here's where it helps to know what 5/2 means. I'm going to do this off to the side here. U to the 5/2, well, that's the same as u to the 1/2 times 5, right? 5 times a half is 5/2, and that's the same as the square root of u to the 5th power, right? I'm just raising Same as doing this right here. I'm taking the square root of u and raising it to the 5th power. A lot of times you'll run into trouble with these, especially if you're dealing with negative numbers of trying to plug it into your calculator, so it helps to know that 5/2 is just the square root to the 5th power. So let's go ahead when we plug stuff in and do it that way. So we've got 2/15 times the square root of 9 to the 5th power minus 2/15 times the square root of 1 to the 5th power. Okay? And at this point you can plug it into your calculator and figure it out. Let me make sure that I can remember what the square root of 9 to the 5th power is. Plugging it into my computer right here just so that I don't give you the wrong answer. That's 243. So we've got 2/15 times 243. I took the square root of 9, which is 3, and raised it to the 5th power, minus 2/15 times 1 to the 5th power. Well, that's just 1, so that just kind of stays the same. So in my, we'll rewrite it over here. 2 times 243, well, that's going to be 486/15 minus 2/15, which is going to give us 484/15. So we've got some fractions going on, but they're not difficult fractions. This is fairly simple. You want to make sure that you keep everything in terms of fractions. So again, I did this 243 times 2 gave me the 486, and then I just did the basic subtraction there with the fractions. So I'll go through this one more time. This is an involved process, but it gets us to where we need to be. Start with what they gave you. Find a new way to write it. In this case, it was u to the 3/2 du, which told us what our u was. So we take our u, find the derivative, and then figure out what our du is. See if our du is exactly what we need. In this case, it was 3 times as much as we needed, so we knew we had to multiply everything by 1/3. Once we did that, we had to find out what our new u-bounds were. To find your u-bound, plug in the x-bounds into whatever you found for u. So in this case, we had 2 cubed plus 1 is 9, and for the lower one, 0 cubed plus 1 is 1. And then you solve as you did before. And remember not to plug in anything for u anymore. Before, at one point, we would plug in what we had found for u, but because we changed these bounds, because we switched everything over into terms of u, we're just solving for u from here on out. And once you've done that and done the arithmetic, you will come up with 484/15.